that table is literally open to everyone. If there are 1,000 walls, and there's 1,000 opportunities for tables around which to gather and to share.
Hi, welcome to Healing Chocolate Chip Cookies, a podcast about creativity, conversation, and community. I'm Rachel. Thank you for joining us. I'm also really glad to be here today with my friends and colleagues from the Welcome Church of Philadelphia, Pastor Violet Little and Pastor Schaunel Steinnagel, and our production manager and lay pastor of the Welcome Church, Pauli Reese. Thank you guys all for joining us today. And I'm really looking forward to talking. So this is going to be like an introduction to like what the Welcome Church is about and how it came to be and who are the people involved. So thank you for joining us. So Pastor Violet, do you want to tell us how the Welcome Church came to be?
It's such a strange story in a way. But the Welcome Church was born in the women's restroom of the train station here in Philadelphia. And I will back up a little. I was doing my psychoanalytic studies, and I would have to commute into town. And I take the train. And I would often be exhausted, especially on the way home, with long intervals in the schedule for the train. And I always had to use the restroom. And I would go in there and I would see the women washing their hair and using the hand dryers to dry up or changing their clothes, or even some women who were taking naps behind the stalls. And it just struck me that there was no place for the women to go, and it would stay on my mind. But it got to the point where I actually one day looked into the eyes of one of the women, and she looked at mine, and we were both exhausted, and I couldn't get that look out of my mind, and felt that I had to do something. And the something I did was not in terms of starting a church. I just wanted to have a place where the women could have a cup of tea, maybe rest, maybe not have to drag all their belongings for hours. And it eventually developed in what was called the Welcome Center. I had been pastor of a housed congregation. That means a church that has a building, for 14 years in the Mount Airy section of Philadelphia. A wonderful, wonderful congregation. But eventually I knew I had to leave that congregation to start what ultimately became the Welcome Church. And we were given a space inside one of our church buildings here in Center City, Lutheran Church of the Holy Communion. And that space was to be used just to serve tea and for the women or anyone else who especially have been unhoused to come and rest. And ultimately people came to me and said, "We know you're a pastor. Can we have Bible study?" And so I started doing Bible study. The community started worshiping. We picked a place together where worship outdoors made sense, and it just kept growing, and I know you'll hear more about that. But basically, the beginnings of the Welcome Church was very incarnational, very the Word made flesh and dwelt amongst us, and it was in that women's bathroom of Suburban Station.
That's really beautiful. The Welcome Church is described as a church without walls. What does that mean to you? And how does that differ from a housed congregation?
Well, I will give a disclaimer going into this answer that I'm an ordained Presbyterian minister, but I have done precious little work inside of being paid to be a pastor inside of a housed congregation. So as far as discussing differences, I do not know that I would be the expert on that subject. But what a primary thing a church without walls obviously means is the most obvious example of what we do is we worship outside on the Parkway on a couple of Sundays of the month. And, and that is the sort of spiritual center of what we do as far as worshiping in the area of where people who are without housing at this time in their lives, where they live and sleep and hang out during the day. That's where our congregation meets. And then there's a couple of churches, a couple of housed congregations that give us space to use during the week, really sort of fanning out from that central area of the Parkway. So there's the very literal meaning of being a church without walls, that there is no building, and we don't no one owns a building that's called the Welcome Church. That definitely gives the focus on the kind of congregation it is being a congregation made up of primarily of people experiencing homelessness. The other thing a church without walls helps us to think about is that the church is literally the definition of the word being about people. I think, it's a linguistic difficulty to figure out how to use the language of like, I need to go by the church to drop something. Like, we know what we mean when we say that. But I mean, and there's, but I almost try to figure out, like, to say, like, church. Sometimes, if I'm thinking, I will try to say I need to go by the church building. Like, if I'm talking, something, because the church is the sort of the primary biblical meaning of church is people who have been called to be together in a new way. And so we might, so that should just be the meaning of church. But Church Without Walls helps us to be a little more cognizant of that. And literally a broad swath of people have come to be a part of the Welcome Church, both people who are without housing and people who are housed at this time in their lives who have incredibly interesting things about them that cause them to be part of the Welcome Church as well. So it's a community that does, seek to create a welcoming space across boundaries of society. So with walls in a figurative sense in that way as well.
That's one of my favorite things about the Welcome Church is like the focus on meeting people where they're at.
I'll just say, Rachel, once we were doing the Walk Against Hunger, I just love the Welcome Church because, a lot of churches talk about welcoming anyone, but the Welcome Church really does. And I just found that, like, you can be involved in something and not know what anyone else thinks of it or how it appears or whatever. So I just loved that you just kind of, said that spontaneously.
I really believe that.
It was nice.
It was
nice to be observed in that way. So,
but there's a literal meaning of meeting people where they're at, and because we don't stay in one place and expect people to come to us. So literally, we are going, whether it's in the subway or by the bridges or at Love Park or wherever the people are. We are literally meeting people where they are. And the image to me in terms of the church without walls is knocking down some of the walls that exist that separate us, turning the walls into tables, like the tables we're sitting around right now. And that table is literally open to everyone. If there are 1,000 walls and there's 1,000 opportunities for tables around which to gather and to share and to bring what we have. Like, I always think of this giant potluck where everyone puts something on that table and it gets shared.
I love that. And I also think like that quote, like, if you have more than enough, share what you, like, build a longer table, whatever. That's not the exact quote, but you know what I mean. But like that idea, I just think of when we used to have like meals together or like food together, there would be nothing on this table and people would share whatever that always spoke so highly to me. Like, people would bring in like a package of ramen noodles, or they would have an extra razor and they would put it on this table to share with someone else. And it was like, whatever they had was so generous and so loving. Yes. That table of abundance always spoke highly to me.
I think it's because people knew that their gifts were welcome, that whatever they had was valued and not looked down upon, and that, the old image of people, we have everything and we're going to share with you poor people kind of thing, that's another wall, it's a paradigm shift that we have had to work very hard to build an atmosphere where everyone's gifts are recognized, shared, and truly, truly celebrated.
I just think a lot about that time we had a baby shower for one of our members, yes. And I just remember being so taken by how much people had to share. Do you guys remember that
yes.
event? And this,
and there's been more than one baby shower, but I'm going to guess which one you're talking about.
Well, and there has been more than one. Like, we're helping people through this amazing part of their lives, and like at this one, it was just so beautiful and authentic. Everyone was giving what they had, like books from an old, like from the library discard pile. Someone was singing songs. People were like making homemade cards. Someone was made a cake. There was so much love surrounding this baby before she was even born. And then even as this baby has grown up, she has these are a bunch of aunties all around her. She would come to these women's groups and hug legs, and people just were part of her life and part of her mother's life. And it was just such a beautiful show of support.
And then there was another baby, so now I know which one you're talking about, so I'll talk about the other one. There was another baby shower in which, again, everyone was giving something. And it's just, again, you don't know what gifts people have to offer until you open the space. Because somebody who I might think might not have, I would not know that she has the finances to acquire a gift to somebody, and someone who I wouldn't know, maybe even is she really following what are her interests of this group, whatever. But someone who I'll start out with those two biases going in the conversation. I don't know how much money you have, and I don't really know if you care about, you haven't told me you have any interest in this affair. And she came with a gift, she went and acquired a gift and brought it for the baby. And it was just so amazing that this community and caring about one another, and it, beyond what you would assume going into the conversation.
I guess that's another question. What is a gift that someone has given to you that has been meaningful?
The one that I've probably spoken about the most, I had to pause because I feel like half of my house is filled with the gifts.
This is true. I recognize that too. I'm so lucky.
But I think the one that you're referring to was, it was around Christmas time, and a woman in our community who keeps very much to herself and very, very quiet, approached me with this shopping bags and a gift bag that I recognized from the dollar store, and she wanted to speak to me privately. And when we went aside, she gave me this bag and said, this is a Christmas gift for you. And all I could see was this white fluff on top, and I put my hand, and it was wet, it was damp. And she then said, I'm sorry it's still wet, but I wanted to wash the blanket for you, and I just washed it in the bathroom. And she had given me her own blanket that she slept with to keep her warm. And again, she had given me her whole world, the most precious thing. And it brought me right back to what Christmas was, where we're celebrating, God giving humanity God's most precious gift. That blanket just, I don't know that I've ever received another gift like that, but she was so delighted to share what she had with me. It's really hard to still tell that story without, feeling it inside my body. And
I feel that. I love that story. I think it's so beautiful.
Chills, but many, many gifts. And as you know, Rachel, we have so many amazing artists in the Welcome Church. And, I have one sketch, one picture framed in my home office, and it's a picture of 4 people sleeping on the street with a blanket, and the artist had drawn a picture of where he sleeps, and what he did was he incorporated a picture of a pizza box that they had just shared food, but instead of the pizza box saying pizza on it, it said peace. And this was a way he would integrate a positive message into everything he did. And wow, there's so many things.
A meaningful gift, a fascinating gift, was a certain person sketched me during Bible study, a piece of available white paper. That's just amazing, that the gifts people have, that someone can draw a amazing likeness of someone who, that skill exists. I wasn't sitting for a portrait. I'm walking around a room leading a Bible study. They sketched my face, and it was just amazing. So I have that, and that is amazing to me.
Seeing and recognizing your beauty, they saw that you were beautiful, and they wanted to show you that you were beautiful. Even yesterday, someone was asking like how I was doing. She's like, I know you've been going through a lot, and I wanted to see how you're feeling, and like, and it was just so nice. Like she was paying attention to me and was like aware of me and like was wishing me well. Like she's, and it was such a nice interaction. And I've had so many beautiful interactions like that where like people, like I matter to somebody, and like they, obviously it's a very mutual relationship, but it's very beautiful and authentic. And, I feel like that is a definite gift of the Welcome Church. Also, what you were saying about the breaking down barriers and the importance of language and what we're doing and what we care about. And
we are definitely not the only ones carrying this banner, but helping people to move from the phrase the homeless to people experiencing homelessness. Just that there's not a monolithic group of folks who you can use one word to describe their it assumes, I think, that everyone who is experiencing homelessness, appears the same and hangs out in the same place or whatever, when you use a phrase, and so helping break down that wall of understanding that even as far as people who might live on the streets versus people, and people who are in shelters and people who are in all kinds of other kinds of transition in their lives, it's such a wide range of experiences that people are going through that helping people to, kind of be more broader with the language that they use to express that and understand that, I think is...
We've also started using more the unhoused, because what we found on the street is that homes are created in community. People create a sense of home even when there's no house. One of the words that we started using was unhoused, and we are definitely aware that language keeps changing and that we try to be open. In the beginning, the ELCA was referring to our ministry, and the ELCA is the denomination to which I belong, Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. It was described as that I was serving or working with people in poverty, and I had to emphasize that it was economic poverty, because there were many riches within the community in terms of kindness and talent and generosity. So to make the distinction that it was economic poverty, that people were at a certain income level, but they were not depleted of gifts. So language just keeps evolving the same way pronouns are evolving, the same way, we're going to be tripping up on words we say, and so we have to be open to whatever changes there are that help us best describe our best selves and our best human living situation together.
Homelessness or unshelteredness in the past has something to contribute as well. And it doesn't diminish their contributions, that they are different than the contributions we make. The thing that I worry about is that the language of being homeless or like being poor is unhelpful because it is vague.
Yes.
And in some ways, I would make the argument because the language of Christian and religious and church is vague, because those words have come to mean so many things. And just like the way that words mean different things, not all of those meanings are helpful or life-giving.
Yes.
I wish all of those things, churches, spirituality, Christianity, belief, were more life-giving. And I think we are at this point in the world where maybe they are not as life-giving as they used to be, for whatever reason. I don't even know if that's a good or a bad thing. Well, it's not a good thing to not be life-giving. I'll stake a claim to that. But I don't know that there is necessarily blame, to be assessed. Okay, well maybe there is blame to be assessed. You're watching me walk back all of the things that I'm saying and taking a stand. But what's most important to me at least, and what I feel drawn to the Welcome Church about, is that the experience of creating life-giving things is what's most important. It's much more important to amplify those things and to celebrate those things and to put energy into those things than into putting energy into pointing out how bad it is to not be life-giving. If that
Yes.
makes any
Pauli, can you say a little more about what you mean by life-giving?
the serenity prayer, which gets used in a lot of religious-based recovery programs. This notion about having the wisdom to know like what things about who I am and my experience, my life circumstances I can change. What things to know the difference between like the things that I can't change. And we are not saying that all of these things, these life circumstances that are unhelpful, like the experience of not having enough, enough of anything, whether it's food, social interaction, whether it is medical care, whether it is, frankly, the money, to have the choice to not sleep rough. Because we have some community members that are choosing that are choosing to sleep rough because they don't want to choose otherwise, and we affirm that. But to have the resources to be afforded enough agency of one's life to not choose like what your good is, what you understand your good to be, I think is important. And what I think the Welcome Church does that is different from the vast majority of spiritual communities that I've been a part of have served a particular role of either servant leadership or thought leadership or spiritual leadership. The language of church would be pastoring, is that besides, I would say, the avoidance of intentional affliction of harm to self or others, we are not saying that being a good person, being a bad person, is dependent on one's circumstances. There's even a level of complexity to saying, like, the things that we do determine whether or not we are good people. Because there is more to the story than that.
There's more to everybody's story. Like, everyone has so much to share and give and offer. People are not just someone who is homeless or just someone who has cancer. This and this, we label everything, but then they're really just people. Like, who knows, like, the many gifts that each person has.
I mean, we walk around with a lot of masks, and I think that's, so we talk about, walls, we can talk about masks also. And and I think this ties in a little with the language of poverty as well, because I wanted to make the old model, the paradigm shift away from people saying, oh, we have so much, we want to go share it. And it's like, kind of like, but what are the places in your life where you have, needs, and how do you, and what interactions do you have your own needs filled? We go around with a lot of masks. I think all kinds of people in all kinds of circumstances that I have everything together. I mean, it's nice to act tough, or it's nice to act, to hide behind different veneers we can put in front of ourselves. And the ability to become vulnerable with each other, yes. To say that, I have, I do have these needs I bring to the table, and people across, giving space for people across the board of all kinds of folks to do that. And then to, at the same time say, everyone has needs and everyone has gifts, and acknowledging that at the same time is, I think that's a big part of the paradigm shift, and a big part of sort of redefining some of these words of poverty. And we don't like, I'm not going to speak, people don't like to admit their needs necessarily, but so granting space for that, for people to be comfortable enough to be vulnerable enough to do that.
Well, when this podcast came up, this is very daunting to me. There's a lot about this that is so out of my comfort zone, but I was given the space to try something new, and I think that's what kind of the Welcome Church, and like what you're saying, like, there's so much people have inside of them that they don't give themselves credit for, or they don't recognize,
we
or they
hide
never.
both our gifts.
Yeah,
in
like
Yes.
I would never, on my own. Like I have really loved doing this, but I would have really been very wary about doing this altogether. And it's like been such a great experience, but I would have never. But it just like there was an opening for this possibility for something that I would not have sought out myself. So I think like, and that's just my story. And I know everyone has a story, like they're hiding behind something that they don't want to, you know, like, or there's like a wall, there's a barrier, even if it's their own wall that they built themselves. Like,
So, but we did this exercise on a retreat one time together, and we had brown paper bags and a bunch of magazines and odd pictures. And the assignment was to take the pictures, and the pictures glue on the outside what you wanted everyone to see of you, and then take pictures and put them inside the bag, the things that we hide or the things that people don't know about. And we opened it up. Folks did not have to share what was inside their bag, but as they did, those layers of vulnerability that revealed so much about the wholeness of who they were was very powerful.
because everybody wants to present as like they got it together.
Yeah,
And
that
I think
outside,
just
yeah.
maybe on the sort of the language of church and what is more and less life-giving, I think sometimes there has been a presentation in certain contexts of church that you come in and have it all together, you know, as far as like you've
Like your Sunday best.
But you've affirmed this. You wear your Sunday best, and you've affirmed this creed, and you therefore, and that's sort of the end of the conversation. Like, right? It's like, you know, and I find it really much more interesting. It's like, tell me what you believe. Tell me where you're at. What things are you struggling with? What in the faith realm? Like, what do you find it easy to affirm? And again, this involves vulnerability because people don't want to step in. No, I affirmed the creed. I'm good. What are you comfortable with? What do you have questions about? What do you affirm with God? I mean, we can sometimes do the Bible study post-mortem where people say some pretty wacky things sometimes, but it's honest. And it's you're going to get a lot. We're all going to grow a lot deeper in our faith if we're honest about what we believe today. And come back the next week and continue the conversation rather than just sort of like reading something by rote. I was talking with a woman recently in a different context from the Welcome Church, but I think it's somebody who both goes to a host church, but she, I think, has a lot of questions about the creed, so to speak. And it's like, how do we open up spaces for those questions to be part of what we do as a church? I find that much more life affirming than, if you don't affirm this, why not? You really haven't. You're not where I'm at.
Oh, I think part of what helps is we have an amazing and wide clergy team, and the people within our community know that we don't have it all together. So I think it just kind of makes it open, and there's such an honesty in especially those Bible studies, that I look forward to Bible study every week because I know at some point in that Bible study I'm going to encounter God talking directly to me. And so I think folks know we're not there to give the answers because, first of all, we don't have the answers. Also, they know that there's a little bit of that answer in each one of us, and we're there to listen. And, I heard this wonderful phrase. A lot of people talk about being spiritual but not religious. That's a pretty common phrase these days. And I think that's a very common thing because in the beginning people would say to me, of course they're going to come to your service. You're serving food. And that's not it at all. I mean, that really devalues the strong hunger for the holy that we see within our community and the way that we are all hungry but all being fed. So
it's not a neat process. There's something about spirituality that should be a little unpacked or
Messy,
surprising, messy, crazy, not a straight line.
As messy as the women's bathroom in a train station.
And so, yes, we try to package things too neatly, and I think it's ultimately it's a disservice. So we get to live a much more honest search pattern. A member of our clergy team, whose name is Peter Ahn, was once discussing the story of Palm Sunday from the Gospel of Luke, where it's a donkey that has never been ridden before, that Jesus, and he was just relating that to the parkway, that we're all on this journey, but you certainly don't know what's going to happen. There might just be some, the donkey might kick or whatever. But I mean, that's the thing. We're not talking about a neat story, and
Well, I think COVID really COVID really was hard in a million different ways, but it was also like all of a sudden everybody's life unraveled. And like you can be at any point in time when your life suddenly unravels and suddenly you're a lot more vulnerable, or your vulnerability is a lot more visible than, like you can hide behind your mask or whatever. But then COVID happened and like everybody's life became a mess. And like it was just so, what's that word? Like we were all on the same playing field. Like everything that anybody cared about was suddenly different, like work or home or whatever. And it was just like, there was like a lesson in that vulnerability and like just common vulnerability. Like we're all kind of vulnerable and we're all kind of strong and we're all kind of just trying to make it, no matter who we are, where we are.
And all of a sudden, I hope we all learned from this as a society, things, what we call the normal definition of words like poverty and hunger. All of a sudden, those things became like people couldn't hide behind their masks anymore. All of a sudden, it was like, wow, there are people who are hungry, who weren't telling people that before, who it wasn't as obvious before. It was definitely under a veneer. And, all of a sudden, that was so much more evident that people needed to, go to emergency food sites more. And so, yes, I mean, it was very equalizing in that.
And there was also like that thing, like, there was so many people needed stuff, and then there were so many people helping each other. Like suddenly all these like restaurants were just giving food away, or there was support, like we were taking care of each other, or like remember when people were singing to each other and they were holding each other up when they needed to be held, and not like but it was like that was an experience that united the world, but it was also any experience of being alive can, like, everyone needs to eat. Everyone needs a safe place to rest and supportive people around them as their community. My experience with the Welcome Church was really like made clear by COVID. I mean, it just was like not made clear. It was just highlighted, like what the Welcome Church values. The good things about COVID were like very similar is my take.
And at the same time, we were painfully aware of that communities of color suffered more. It still was not a totally level playing field. I think people became more aware of our commonalities, but yet even in COVID, we could see the clear differences of who got better treatment or who had more access. And so we were aware of that, and we had to try to work towards ways of just like when there isn't COVID.
Yeah.
How do we work towards a more just system? And that's a lifelong, that's not a committee, that's not a cause, it's just a lifelong way of living that we have to try to figure out.
And the digital divide became obviously very obvious.
Very
Some
obvious.
people could go to work and school and church on Zoom, and some people couldn't, because if you don't have internet access, you can't. I love, as far as the amount of emergency food sites that broadly define both official things that the city did, and then things like the community fridges, that all that popped up. So hunger, it was more.
There's more kindness.
There was so much.
There was more kindness.
The need became more obvious. There was a lot of amazing responses. At the same time, it highlighted some of the need that really needs to be addressed at a deeper level, because it's not. There's things that became so obvious that they're so entrenched, and that's why the effects were playing out the way they were.
Like, absolutely. Like, it's really hard to stay home, wash your hands, and wear a clean mask and use hand sanitizer when you don't have a home and you don't have access to water, and you don't have access to like that. There was a lot of injustices that also came to light more clearly in other ways that. No, thank you both of you for saying, like, there was blessings in that experience, but there was also, it really brought to light a lot of the injustices that continue to exist, and we need to continue to work to, get rid of, make it fair and make people have what they need. So moving on, I love Bible study at the Welcome Church because it's one of the only Bible studies where you used to get a piece of barbecue chicken at the end of it. It was so great. Here's communion and here's your chicken.
The women's dinner that we formerly had one Monday a month.
Would you describe more about that?
Yes, certainly. Around 12 women were invited to gather together at a certain church to cook and eat dinner together. And I would think some of the most amazing things is, again, not knowing what gifts someone has until you open a template in which they can share them. Somebody who can, start frying the burgers with clearly amazing burger frying skill, I'm sure I can fry a hamburger, but some people obviously have had whatever history with that. People who can season salads and salad dressings. And we had a Thanksgiving dinner once when really we just provided the raw ingredients. We brought cranberry and squash and sweet potatoes, and everybody sort of walked in and seized an ingredient and made it into something. That was just amazing, the stories and gifts people have in their background that you would not know unless you open a place where that's appropriate to be discussed. And usually where those things would get discussed would be at a meal preparation time, because when else is that going to come up? And, for some people who that might not have been their specific favorite thing to do, there was space for people to, set tables and decorate and do all kinds of things.
How did that program come to be?
I remember early days of one of our very first gatherings was with the women. We went to see the movie Eat, Pray, Love. And
that is the essence of the Welcome Church.
Well, and Elizabeth Gilbert, actually, who's the author of the book, we came to know her, and she had signed books for each of us, but that's another story. But after we went to the movies, we went to, I think it was Olive Garden, which was a lot of fun because they had, the endless buffet. And so we were there for endless hours talking. And I asked the women, who early on the women's group was called the Women of Eat, Pray, Love. So I said, what would you like to do as a group? And the response was one I never expected. And the women said, we'd love a chance to cook together. And so, because, for me, I was thinking, let's just keep eating out together. That works for me. But the women really didn't have much of an opportunity to cook. So we found a church, a wonderful church, Trinity Episcopal, I'll say the name. And they, eventually we started meeting other places, but we ended up at Trinity, who opened up, their hearts, the rector, everybody, and their kitchen, this wonderful kitchen, and we would meet monthly to do that. Now with COVID, we had to kind of morph the kind of gatherings we had. But that's the beauty of the Welcome Church, is that we don't have to vote for 6 months about what we should do. We just adapt and find a place or another way to do things, again, to keep people safe. Our women's groups now, currently, we meet one morning a month at the food court in the train station, and we have a group called Morning Jane. And it's very simple. The women gather. We buy coffee or tea or whatever the women want for a beverage, and we talk about different topics and gather. And the second gathering, though we can't cook, we have the joy of meeting in a knitting shop. And you don't have to knit. We gather there, and there we just, because we can't cook due to certain COVID restrictions, we order pizzas, and we either do a craft together or just come together. There is never lack. And when you have pizza, of course, there is no lack of conversation. But I will say historically, there have been different women's groups. And because the things we did in those groups over the years was so powerful, there was a collection of everything we did. And Rachel, maybe you can tell us about the book that will accompany this podcast called Healing Chocolate Chip Cookies.
Well, look forward to a book about healing chocolate chip cookies, and it's based on recipes and art projects that we kind of have done together as we kind of created this community of people who care about each other and just having this space for people to be together. But that's coming out soon. And one other thing that the Welcome Church is really excited about is this new program called Pay It Forward Philly.
Pay It Forward Philly is the opportunity to share in a different way. There are food vendors who will allow customers the opportunity to pay a little bit extra. And with that little bit of extra, a sticky note will go on the walls in their place of business. And it's like a prepaid gift card for someone who might not have enough money.
Everyone
they can come
has
in,
something
take
to
the
give.
sticker.
Everyone needs
and
something
eat.
sometimes, yes.
Yes.
So please check out the Heart of Catering for that, because they are our first restaurant and they're wonderful, and we're so grateful for them. And we're so grateful for the many volunteers and people who make us egg salad sandwiches and open up their church and make us blessing bags and give us socks. And there's so many wonderful people, and we're so lucky to be part of this amazing community.
And it's on social media.
And it's on social, so Pay It Forward Philly, and then the Welcome Church has a website, thewelcomechurch.org.
And Facebook.
And Facebook. We're very social media sort of savvy. In one sentence or less, why is the Welcome Church important for you? What sets it apart? Ready, set, go.
I think it's the church of the future. I think that church buildings are only closing, and the general desire for young people to show up in a church is not something that's occurring right now at this stage of history. And when I sit in any church and they say, we just need more people, and I say to myself, oh, you need people? I know where the people are. There's people out in the world, and when you take the time and engage them, these experiences of mutual vulnerability will develop, where people share what their real needs are and what their real hopes and dreams are. And so just being a part of building those relationships.
I think for me, the Welcome Church, I find a sense of home and a sense of family. And I'm so grateful to be part of such this loving and expansive and welcoming community. Oftentimes when we finish our groups together, we'll take a picture of our hands, and hands are great because they're very common, but it's also people can be their own person. Your hands tell the story of your life, and my hands aren't that much different from yours. Your story and my story are very similar, and we have held people, we have ate, we have cried, and so that idea of our common humanity, we're all in this together. And it's so nice to be here. It's always nice to be with all of you. Thank you for joining us. This program is made possible by the First United Methodist Church of Germantown, the Lutheran Church of the Holy Communion, the Presbytery of Philadelphia and the Covenant Grant, Bryn Mawr Presbyterian Church Outreach Grant, the ELCA World Hunger Education and Networking, and our amazing and incredibly talented production manager, Pauli Reese of Uncommon Good. Uncommon Goods is a podcast where it's a collaboration of ordinary people doing uncommon good in service of our common humanity. Both Uncommon Good and this podcast, Healing Chocolate Chip Cookies, can be found wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for joining us. We're so glad you're here.